Hello there everyone, Inky Fingers here from Inky Fingers Architectural Art. In today's picture I'm going to paint sunshine. Well, simply to paint sunshine you just need dark shadows. Prominent shadows will appear in bright sunlight, and for this picture I'm going to be painting a scene in Polperro in Cornwall here in the UK. An extremely quaint little fishing village with houses built up on houses going up the hills. It's a haven for artists. And also, as this is an architectural drawing channel, well, you can't get any better than this, where you've got houses, lots of little houses, just as I said, perched on top of each other. It can make a very interesting little picture. Now, as I said, how do we paint sunlight? Simply by painting in shadows. But as you can see in this picture, there isn't really many shadows because of this position of the sun. The only real main shadow is under this overhang, which is quite nice. So I will be moving the sun into a different position in the sky. So perhaps we have probably somewhere coming out down here. So we'll have, like, for example, a shadow of this house protruding far more over this house. This is like a little L shape. Houses go there, and then this house goes off in an angle. So we could have this house in shadow and also putting some shadow on here. So it will make this house here, the part that's not in shadow, much brighter. And we'll do the same with all the other houses. And I'm going to ink this out using Winsor & Newton India ink and just a small mapping pen. Now, mapping pens don't really hold much ink. Mapping pens do not, as you can see, do not have any holes, so it can hold a lot of ink. The paper I'm going to be using, again, I'm just going to try this ultra cheap watercolor pad. And the paints I'm using are just white knights. So the plan of attack on this picture for the drawing was, as you probably be able to see, it's drawn quite loosely, especially the buildings in the background. It's just very much like an outline. Some of the buildings don't have much definition because I want to try and keep these buildings, if possible, in the background and put more of the detail in the foreground. And I will also try to have the lines, the inked lines, a little bit more prominent for these houses and maybe up into this middle area. So to start this, I'll do a little bit, just a touch of the inking in stage on camera, and then I'll continue and I'll come back. But that's just really to show you what the pen's like. So if you start with this little jetty, that we can see that this little mapping pen gives quite sort of little scratchy lines. Even if you press down, it doesn't really give you much of a thick line. So you can do much more delicate work, smaller pieces, if you fancy doing smaller pieces with a dipping pen. So you don't want to use a Unipin fine liner or any micron fine liner or any other type of fine liner. You want to try using real ink with a real dipping pen. A little nib like this is really, really nice. It gives you confidence if you're not used to using a pen, a dipping pen. You can get really nice little hatch lines if you want to do any shading with hatch lines. You just get nice detail. Right, so I'm at this stage at the moment. And you can see it is quite neat once you put the lines on with this pen, because as I said earlier on, it gives a very fine line. You can do quite fine details without the fear of it blobbing around or anything. So as I said previous, these background buildings here are going to be inked in, but I'm going to ink them in using the same pen. And I'm just going to show you just how scratchy this pen can be. So we'll start with this here, this building here. And if you hold it correctly, I'm holding it in the long angle. I'm not holding it right up here for detail. I'm holding it somewhere in the middle of the shaft. So I'm not putting any pressure on, real pressure on. And so you can get this incredibly sketchy line. And I have just dipped this pen in the ink. So it's not like that looks like it's a green fence or something. So it's not like it's actually running out of ink. The nib is fully loaded with ink, but it's just because of it's a mapping pen, it's not designed to do thick, juicy lines. As such, you can get really nicely finely detailed lines, and it's perfect for things in the background where you definitely do want to see them just very sketchy, quite indistinct. But you can see just what I've done there, how much further in the background these houses look compared to these, even though there's no colour on to define anything that's recessed. It's just simply the more scratchiness using this nib on the paper. And that's the inking stage done. Now we can see, now it's fully completed, we can see how much stronger the lines are. The ink work is at the bottom going into the mid part of the picture, and then in the background we've got the houses in a much more scratchier, thinner application of ink, even though it's all done with the same ink and the same pen. So we can see even at this stage that these houses in the background are in the background. Now in the photograph we do have, which is quite typical of Polperro, grassy hills. Lots of trees in the background because of course the houses are going up the hill. So we need to put some greenery in. So the sky, I'm going to put in some cobalt blue, very light, and then in that put a little bit, just a touch of manganese. I'll just lighten it up a tad. And then for the trees, well, I'm going to put some like cadmium yellow. It's a little bit dirty because of the blue, and I'm going to put a tiny bit of this olive green. This is just going to give us a nice bright sunny yellow. And then on dry paper, just straight in. There's hardly any sky, so I'm just going to put a little bit of sky over there. And they go straight into the green. And just paint this underwash. That's all this is, an underwash. And we've also got foliage in between some of the houses. So once again, we can use this nice sunlit green and just paint in, just drop in this colour. Now also while this is drying, we can paint in some other parts. So we can do some of these the roofs here. Now the roofs looks like slate grey. I'm going to stick some burnt sienna. That's going to make this nice sort of slate grey colour. I think I might stick a little bit of this green in actually. There you go, just makes it ever so slightly mossy. And then we're starting with these front houses. Drop this in here. And get some burnt sienna and I think a little bit of cad red, just to warm it up a tad. And I'm just going to drop some of this colour into the very wet wash. Now these houses here are pretty much the same, but the ridge tile above this house is more red. So it's the same, we'll put some of that there. We'll stick a little bit of red here and there. Just drop it in. Charge the colour, there it does what it wants. And I think I may stick a little bit of this green. Just for a little bit of moss going up that roof. And it's the same for this. You know, that's going to dry much lighter. And the roofs up at the top, they are the same colour as these roofs just below, but because they're in the background, we cannot have them nowhere near as strong, so we'll just use the same colour but a lot more water. Dilute it all down. Now while we've got this cerulean blue, and I've put the cerulean blue for this roof, I'm going to continue with the same colour. It may not be the same colour as in the actual scene, but I'm using cerulean. And I'm going to paint all the blue bits with this colour, which means the whole of this building here. But we've got to be very careful about this roof because it's still wet. If it goes in, which it just has a touch there, doesn't really matter. All that does is it joins that with that. It gives it a little bit of connection. So never be frightened about what happens in a watercolour paint. There you go. I've just touched that deliberately so we can see now it's now spreading down into this blue painted front, but it doesn't look bad. It looks quite nice still. And that's a lot of the picture actually painted in already. So I've left the picture to dry. I've put some nice watery washes on, drop the paint in and just let it run around. It's gone quite a nice colour. We've got different colours. It looks like different stains and in the roofs. We've got the grey, we've got the burnt sienna, and we've got these greenish mossy areas. But now what we need to do is the background trees up the hill. We can see we've got some trees here, and then it just goes on to pretty much a grassy plain. So all I've mixed up here is some French ultramarine blue and some of this cadmium yellow type colour, and it's just put a sort of a darker bluey green. So all I'm going to do here is to put some. Now you can't really dry brush on this paper because it is quite inexpensive. It hasn't really got much of a grain to it, so I'm just blobbing the shape. We've got a few little trunks going down, and then we have some more foliage. This comes across there. This is important. Get the light dark against the light here, which is going to make it look like the houses are in sunshine. It's all about dark against light, light against dark. And then what I'm going to start to do as we get into more of the sunshine, I'm just going to simply add more. Ooh, that's a bit much, but oh no, yeah, it's a bit much. Darken that up a tad. So now we've got more of a mid-tone green, and I shall just start and paint in again, once again cutting around. We don't want to put too many trees. I mean, all this is trees, but I don't want to put too much detail in. This was the main area I wanted the trees to show as tree shape. You know, let's just put a few little. There we go. I'm fiddling there. Shouldn't do that. So I'll just put a few little blobs here just to make it look like there's the outline. Again, leave some little gaps here and there, little flecks. Plenty paint on the brush. Don't do it dry. And now I'm going to put a little bit more of the blue in. Just drop a few little bits and bobs here there, and then I'm just going to go back in just to change the colour again. Stick a little bit more blue in, ultramarine blue, again to make it into, or change the green darker again, and then just drop little bits in, so we're just varying the green once again. I think I'll put a little bit more blue in that, make it even darker. A few little blobs with this darker paint here and there, just around here. And that's it. We let that dry, we do not touch it. Now while all this foliage is drying and we're dealing with green, we can put some green around here by the shoreline. So if you look at the picture, a lot of the shore, well, where the shoreline is against the buildings, it is quite mossy. So I've mixed up a sort of a lightish or mid-lightish green. This is yellow or cadmium yellow type colour. It's a little bit of olive green and a little bit of cobalt blue, and that's give this rather nice colour. So all I need to do here is to just along with the where the water meets the buildings, I'll just put some of this up there, and then once again we want it more like a stain, so get the small brush, drop a little bit of clean water onto that paint, and then just pull it around and make it more into a stain deep down here, leaving some little gaps, as we can see here. You can see again, if you look at the photograph, we do have some of the white stone washed building shown. So I'll just leave a few little gaps. But as we go up, a bit more water, pull it around so it begins to look more like a stain. Like so. And we can also do this going across here. Now this is where of course we're going to have a lot of shadow. Drop some of this into at least this part of the wall. Now once again, a little bit of water, drop it, pull it around a touch, a little bit of water there, a little bit of water there. A little bit of light the green just under there. Drop it on and then pull it down. So the top meets the bottom, and hopefully we'll have this lighter area in the middle. And there we have our moss coloured walls, or seaweed encrusted walls, I suppose this would be. And we'll let that dry. Now this building here has got some texture. It's got some slightly grey areas where the whitewash is wore away and it's showing the stone underneath. So we can use pretty much a colour we used for some of the roofs, this sort of greyish, like greyish colour, and we can then just put some, again, it's just going to be a stain, it's not going to be detailed as such. Some paint, just like that, and then again drop some water on, just so it softens the edges a bit. That's far too harsh as it is, so we'll soften the edge, pull it around, but leave some, again, some little white areas just like we did here. It gives a shape of whatever. But we'll have a little bit, it's a little bit here, and we'll put a little bit down here. Now the other thing we can do while this is all drying is we can stick a few windows in, window panes. Now the window panes, they're only small, so we don't want to really start putting colour in. So all I'm going to do is mix up some ultramarine blue and some Payne's grey. That's just going to make a very sort of bluey black. And again, using a tiny little brush, I'm just going to carefully paint in the windows. That could be a little bit darker, I think. So I don't want them neat. I want this to be kept, maybe it's a little bit sketchy. So just like that, nothing much, and I'll just continue all along the picture putting these windows in. Now the windows have been put in. They're pretty much the windows down in the houses that are closer to us, a little bit darker than the windows in the back. I may put some of these, one or two of these windows a little bit darker, just so we've got some variation when it's all dry. But we'll next come to this quayside. Now the quayside is just, again, it's just grey. It's very similar to the roof, or the roofs we've put in. So we can use the same colour, just mixed it a little bit more. This is just cobalt blue and a bit of burnt sienna. Now it's got a little bit touch of green in off the brush, but that's not a bad thing. And then all I'll do is paint in quite flat And then when that's dry, we'll just go over parts and make it a little bit more interesting, because it's now time to paint the sunshine, paint in some shadows, because it's the deep shadows that's going to make the sunshine shine. Now I've mixed a really nice vibrant purple colour by mixing French ultramarine, a sort of crimson type colour, a cool red, and just a touch of yellow ochre. But that's going to give still a very nice deepish purple colour, a sun-baked shadow. I want this shadow to be very warm, and I'm going to apply this with a number 14 sable. Let's get brave. See, look how purple this is. Now I'm doing this with this big brush. It's only a small piece of paper, but I'm doing a big brush simply so I don't mess up the underlying washes. This is going to have a bit of an overhang, so we'll just put a bit of an overhang there. This is an overhang. Now this is important because that's facing away from the sun, but I want that's going to have, that sun's coming down from there. I think it's going to have some sort of angle like that. We'll have a little bit of overhang across there. I'm making it a little bit uneven, just to give a hint that the roof, the eaves, might be a little bit uneven. Right, we're going to have, that's that. Yes, I think we're going to have a little bit of an angle over there. Because it's this, and this, because this is coming towards us, in my little world, it's going to have a shadow coming across, as you can see. I may be wrong, but I'm sticking to that. Now underneath here, it's going to be all in shadow. I don't want it all in shadow though, so I'm going to do, no, yeah, I will have it all in shadow actually. And then that's going to have a bit of shadow there coming off there. And finally, the only thing to do in this picture is of course to put the water in. But we have to put the water in last because we need to put the shading in, the shadows and everything. So once this is all in, we can then copy them into the water. So I'm just going to use the original shadow mix and just paint in with a flat brush, the edge of a flat brush, the reflection of this shadow. Always going horizontally, leaving some little gaps, for the any light ripples. I'm leaving irregular edges along there just to show that there's some movement in the water. Same green we used. And then we go into the white there. Right, and that's all the painting done. The only thing to do is to get your pen, get your ink, and then just have a final look around and see if there's any finer little bits of details you can actually put in with the pen, as it is pen and wash. For example, if you look at this area here, now we can just put a little bit of something just to enhance, because it is in the foreground, of course, a little bit of cross hatching or hatching if we need. We'll just emphasize this part of the bottom of the building, and I think perhaps we can do something with this boat as it is in the foreground. Maybe there's a touch of hatching there, maybe there's a push down on the nib so you do get a slightly thicker line. It's just a hint. Of there could be a few little tiles on the roof. Barely visible, but it just breaks that area up a little bit. And this is the finished picture. I think it does look like it's in quite bright sunshine, because we've got some nice, deep, warm shadows to emphasize the lights. The background houses appear to be in the background because they're not as detailed and not as prominent as the houses in the foreground. The fine nibbed dipping pen we used can give very, very fine lines, fine details, just as good as any fine liner, Unipin, Micron or whatever. But with a dipping pen you do get that added bonus of it can be a bit unpredictable, but it gives more life. You can vary the lines, which you can't do with a normal fine liner. And once again, what I find quite amazing is what the picture actually turned out like on this basically £2.99 pad of watercolour paper. Now you can't really grumble on how this has turned out on this ultra cheap paper, but there we go. How to paint sunlight. So why don't you give it a go? Do a few buildings. They don't have to be much, just little boxes, little rectangles. Figure out where the sun's going to be, something that is going to cast lots of shadows upon other buildings, and see how sunny you can make your picture. So that's it. So until next week, I'll see you then. So goodbye.